In the heart of ancient Rome, where marble palaces gleamed under the sun and legions marched in the emperor's name, one man's madness turned glory into terror. Emperor Caligula, once hailed as a divine savior, would soon become the embodiment of absolute corruption. His laughter echoed through gilded halls as fear silenced an entire empire. Senators trembled, soldiers obeyed without question, and the citizens of Rome learned that a god in human form could also be their greatest curse. What began as the promise of a new golden age became a nightmare written in fire and blood. Temples rose in his honor, sacrifices were made to his vanity, and the mighty empire bent beneath the weight of his insanity. Those who served him became prisoners of his rage, and those who opposed him vanished in the shadows of his wrath. This is not just the story of a mad emperor. It is the tale of how unchecked power can consume the soul, how divine ambition can destroy even the greatest of empires, and how the name Caligula became a symbol of Rome's darkest hour. Long before he was called a monster, Caligula was a boy born into power and fear. His real name was Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus, the beloved son of the great general Germanicus and his wife Agrippina. Rome saw in him the promise of greatness, a new generation that would restore the glory of Julius Caesar himself. But destiny had darker plans. When Caligula was still a child, his father died under mysterious circumstances, poisoned perhaps by the very emperor he served, Tiberius. His mother and brothers soon followed, victims of political purges that left young Gaius surrounded by whispers of betrayal and death. Only he survived, taken under the care of Emperor Tiberius, who saw in the boy both potential and danger. For years, Caligula lived on the island of Capri, trapped in the emperor's twisted world, a place of indulgence, cruelty, and endless paranoia. He learned that in Rome love was weakness and mercy was death. His smile became his shield, his silence his only weapon. Behind that calm gaze grew a mind that absorbed every cruelty, every lie, every ounce of pain. When Tiberius finally died, Rome rejoiced. The tyrant was gone, and in his place rose the charming young prince who had endured his shadow. Caligula entered the city like a god returning to his temple, adored by the people, celebrated by the Senate, and blessed by the army. Crowds shouted his name. Golden statues were raised. The empire bathed in light once more. In his first months as emperor, Caligula seemed like a dream come true. He freed political prisoners, lowered taxes, and staged grand games for the people. He was generous, eloquent, and radiant, the very image of what Rome believed a true Caesar should be. But beneath that brilliance, something darker stirred, something born from years of fear and humiliation. Power to Caligula was no longer a burden. It was liberation. He had survived every enemy, outlived every betrayal, and now stood above them all. In the marble halls of the Palatine Palace, he began to taste the intoxicating sweetness of absolute control. The boy who once feared the emperor had become one, and soon he would test how far his divinity could reach. The Senate praised him. The army worshipped him. The people adored him. But history would remember that this golden beginning was only the calm before the storm, the moment before reason gave way to madness. Caligula was no longer the child of tragedy. He was the master of Rome, and in his heart, a dangerous thought began to bloom. If men could be gods, then why not he? Power changes men, but for Caligula it did something far worse. It consumed him. In the beginning, Rome still believed in him. The Senate called him the new Augustus, poets praised his mercy, and the people cheered his name in the arenas. But then an illness struck, a mysterious fever that nearly took his life. When he recovered, something inside him was different. The gentle, smiling ruler who once thanked the gods began to believe he was one. He started small. Temples once dedicated to Jupiter, Mars, and Apollo now bore his image. He ordered statues of himself to be placed beside those of the gods. When priests objected, he laughed and said, "They will pray to me soon enough." And they did. Not because they believed, but because they feared. Caligula began demanding divine honors, not metaphorically, but literally. He ordered the heads of sacred statues to be replaced with his own likeness. He referred to himself as Neos Helios, the new sun. Senators were commanded to address him as Lord and God. The empire that once bowed to the heavens now bowed to a man who had forgotten he was mortal. With each passing day, His delusion deepened. He appeared before the people wearing golden armor, his body painted in shimmering dust, claiming to embody Jupiter himself. The crowds, terrified yet enchanted, chanted his name as thunder echoed across the forum. Caligula took their awe as proof of his divinity. The madness spread to his decrees. He ordered the sea to be conquered, his soldiers sent to collect seashells as trophies of victory. He declared war on Neptune, the god of the ocean, as if divine rivalry were a game for his amusement. The Senate dared not laugh. They clapped and called it genius. The treasury began to bleed. His grand festivals, golden palaces, and offerings to himself drained the empire's wealth. But to Caligula, gold was eternal. It could not run dry for a god. He dressed his horse, Incitatus, in jewels and silk, feeding it oats mixed with wine. Some said he planned to make the animal a consul. Others whispered that he already had. Behind closed doors, his paranoia grew. He trusted no one, not the Senate, not the guards, not even his family. Dreams of betrayal haunted him. Visions of divine vengeance twisted his sleep. Each morning another nobleman would vanish, another senator executed for imagined treason. The empire trembled, unsure which was worse, his laughter or his silence. By now, Caligula's Rome had become a theater of fear. What once looked like divine glory was now madness in its purest form. The line between emperor and god, between ruler and tyrant, was gone. He no longer ruled as Rome's emperor. He ruled over Rome, as if it were his personal stage, and humanity itself his audience. The boy who once bowed to the gods now believed the world should bow to him. Rome had seen cruel emperors before, but none like Caligula. His madness was not swift. It crept like poison through every corner of the empire. The city that once roared with celebration now whispered in terror. Laughter faded from the streets, replaced by silence, the kind born of fear. The emperor's face, once adored, had become an omen of death. No one knew what would please him or what would enrage him. A simple word, a misplaced glance, even silence could mean execution. Senators who once dined beside him now trembled at his invitations, unsure whether they'd be guests or sacrifices. Caligula began to view every man as a potential traitor. He accused his own family of plotting against him and had them arrested or executed without trial. His palace became a prison of paranoia. The marble corridors echoed with screams of the accused, the shuffle of soldiers dragging the condemned to their fate. Those who lived did so only because his madness had not yet noticed them. His cruelty became performance. Public executions were staged as grand spectacles. He would sit in the arena, draped in gold, watching prisoners and senators torn apart by beasts while the crowd pretended to cheer. Some fainted from horror, others screamed their loyalty, praying the emperor would not look their way. Caligula smiled, not from joy, but from power. He enjoyed breaking people more than killing them. He would summon nobles, praise their loyalty, then order their property seized or their children imprisoned. "Let them know," he would whisper, "that their lives belong to me." Fear was his weapon, and no one dared defy him. Even Rome's soldiers, men hardened by war, began to fear the emperor they once swore to protect. He demanded impossible acts of devotion, men ordered to stand guard for days without food, to worship him as a god, to kill comrades who hesitated. Many obeyed out of terror, their loyalty bought with threats rather than honor. Caligula's paranoia deepened further when he began suspecting the gods themselves of envy. "They fear me," he claimed one night, gazing at the stars, "because I have done what they never could, rule men through fear, not faith." He taxed the people beyond endurance, stripped temples of their gold, and mocked the priests who pleaded for mercy. When famine struck the outskirts of the empire, he blamed the citizens for not worshiping him enough. The empire's glory was collapsing under the weight of one man's insanity, yet no one dared speak his name aloud after sunset. Whispers carried death. Rome's greatest city, the heart of civilization, now beat to the rhythm of one man's rage. In the heart of his palace, surrounded by marble and blood, Caligula ruled a silent empire. He had become everything he once feared. The tyrant he learned from Tiberius, but far worse. And though no one yet dared to say it, the whispers were growing louder in the shadows. Even gods can bleed. For years, Rome endured Caligula's reign of terror, but even the mightiest fear has limits. Beneath the polished marble floors of the imperial palace, rebellion was quietly being born. The senators, once slaves to his cruelty, began whispering of freedom. The soldiers who once guarded his throne started to question their loyalty. Even those who had praised him as a god now prayed for his downfall. Caligula, however, saw none of it. Enclosed in his golden world, he believed himself untouchable. He hosted lavish feasts where guests were forced to praise his divine beauty or risk execution. He mocked the Senate in public, calling them cowards and fools. He demanded new taxes to build a floating bridge across the Bay of Baiae, so he could ride his horse across the sea like a god-defying Neptune himself. To the people, it was madness. To Caligula, it was proof of his own immortality, but cracks had begun to form. The treasury was nearly empty. Soldiers went unpaid for months. Starving citizens cursed his name in secret. The Praetorian Guard, his elite protectors, grew restless. Among them, one man's anger quietly burned: Cassius Chaerea, a loyal officer humiliated too many times by the emperor's mockery. Caligula often mocked his voice, called him weak, and forced him to perform degrading tasks before the court. That humiliation festered into hatred. The breaking point came after yet another public display of madness. During a festival, Caligula announced he would move the capital of the empire from Rome to Alexandria, because the gods prefer Egypt. For the Senate, it was the final insult. For the soldiers, it meant abandonment. For Rome, it meant the end. In the shadows, a conspiracy took shape. Senators, guards, and palace attendants gathered in secret chambers, swearing oaths beneath torchlight. They would strike soon, before the emperor's madness dragged the empire into ruin. But Caligula's arrogance blinded him to the storm rising within his own palace. He laughed at omens, ignored warnings, and mocked the whispers of betrayal. "No mortal can harm a god," he declared one night, raising a goblet of wine. Let them try. The conspirators chose their moment carefully. It would happen during the games, when Caligula's attention was fixed on his own spectacle, and his guards were distracted by the noise of the crowd. Every detail was planned, every participant sworn to silence. Meanwhile, inside the palace, Caligula continued to celebrate his own glory. His laughter echoed through the marble halls, drowning out the approaching footsteps of fate. Rome had waited too long, suffered too deeply. The city's heart beat faster with each passing day, as if it too sensed what was coming. The empire was no longer ruled by a man, but haunted by a god who had forgotten mercy, and soon that god would bleed. It was a cold night in Rome when destiny finally came for the man who called himself a god. The festival had ended, the crowds dispersed, and the emperor returned to his palace, drunk on both wine and arrogance. The marble corridors glowed with torchlight as Caligula laughed with his companions, mocking senators and boasting of his immortality. None of them knew that death was already walking beside him. Cassius Chaerea, the officer he had humiliated countless times, waited in the shadows. His hand gripped the hilt of his sword, his heart pounding with rage and purpose. Around him stood other guards, men who once swore eternal loyalty, but had long since traded devotion for survival. Every face was pale with fear, yet determined. They were not heroes, nor rebels. They were desperate men ending a nightmare. When Caligula entered the underground passage of the palace, his voice echoed, arrogant, triumphant, unstoppable. "The gods envy me," he said. And then came the sound that Rome had longed to hear, the whisper of steel leaving its sheath. The first strike came fast, piercing his shoulder. Caligula staggered, disbelief in his eyes. The second plunged into his chest, and the emperor, who thought himself divine, began to bleed like a mortal. He screamed, not in pain, but in shock, unable to comprehend that his body could betray him. Chaerea struck again, shouting, "This is for Rome!" In moments, the man who had ruled through terror lay dying on the cold stone floor, his golden cloak soaked in blood, his crown slipping from his head, his empire finally freed from madness. His last words, some say, were curses to the gods who failed him. Others believe he died laughing, a madman to his final breath. Outside, the city stirred as rumors spread. "The emperor is dead," whispered the people, almost afraid to believe it. Some wept in confusion, others rejoiced in silence. The Senate moved quickly, erasing his name from monuments, destroying his statues, and proclaiming a new emperor. Rome, they said, must forget. But history does not forget. Caligula's death did not wash away his shadow. It only sealed it. His reign became a warning carved into the heart of civilization, that power without restraint breeds monsters, and that even gods can fall when they forget they are human. In the years that followed, poets, historians, and storytellers argued about who Caligula truly was, a victim of madness or a mirror of Rome's own decay. Yet one truth remained: for all his cruelty, he exposed the fragility of empires built on fear. As centuries passed, his name became legend, whispered with horror, fascination, and disbelief. Temples crumbled, empires fell, but the story of the mad emperor endured. Because in the end, Caligula was not just a man who ruled Rome. He was a warning that the throne of power is never a crown of glory, but a mirror reflecting the darkest corners of the human soul.